Attention campers, here comes Flashpoint. I'm Jason Colthorpe. Good to have you with us. We are diving into some developments in the key races this year in Michigan with our insiders. From the left, Portia Roberson and Nancy Kaffer. And from the right, Caitlin Buss and Dennis Cowan. They're all here for this Sub-Zero January 25th edition of Flashpoint. Happy Sunday, everybody. We saw a major political de-escalation this week in a very appropriate country of Switzerland. While speaking at the World Economic Conference in Davos, President Trump saying he would not use force to take Greenland. He later announced he would not be imposing tariffs on our European allies because of a deal allowing the U.S. to have areas of Greenland to build military bases. That's still in the early stages, but that's the crux of it. Analysts say that's a deal the U.S. already has with Denmark, which controls Greenland. Governor Gretchen Whitmer is at the same conference and while on a panel with other governors, said this about the Greenland flap.
I'm very alarmed about it, and I think it's going to take us a long time to recover from this. We're 1 year into a 4-year term, and the amount of damage that's been done is going to have a long tail for us competitively, for our stature in the world, for trust amongst allies.
That criticism follows a harsh assessment of tariffs by Governor Whitmer, the first times she's spoken out against the White House in quite a while. We'll see if and when the president reacts to that. All right, let's jump to the race for Secretary of State, which has been turned on its head a little bit with the surprise addition of Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, which immediately caused one fellow Democrat to drop out. On the Republican side, one candidate made waves recently claiming he found 15 non-citizens registered to vote. And now the current Secretary of State is investigating this. Macomb County Clerk and Republican candidate for Secretary of State Anthony Forlini says his office noticed non-citizens showing up in the jury pools at an alarming rate.
It turned out that we had just under 200 people at that time that were getting off of jury duty over the time period that we were looking at, a couple months, because they are non-citizens. Well, I thought to myself, oh, how can that be? How can they even be in this database?
Forlini directed his staff to cross-check the jury pool names with the qualified voter file and discovered something else.
We had 14 of them on our database on the QVF, which is the qualified voter file. It was that qualified voter file that really threw me that they shouldn't be on there absolutely at all. 3 of them voted though. And so now we're really spinning this up because this is a big problem.
With almost certainty, those numbers are filled with false positives.
David Becker is the founder of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, a nonpartisan nonprofit. He says Forlini's claim is something that's popped up over the last couple of decades, rarely with malicious intent.
It often doesn't indicate an incidence of voter fraud. It's often, at worst, an incidence of fraud on the courts, someone who is a citizen who is much more likely to claim non-citizenship to get out of jury duty. Someone who commits voter fraud by claiming they're a citizen and voting in an election when they're not. That individual is committing a felony and will be deported.
They presented us with green cards getting off of the jury pool. I don't know what more proof I need on that end. On the other end, the addresses matched up with the QVF and their names matched up, and that's how we came across this. It wasn't a blank database that we just compared 2 databases. How accurate is it? I don't know. You decide.
It is not uncommon for people to try to get out of jury duty.
Democratic SOS candidate Barb Byram has been the Ingham County clerk for the last 13 years. She thinks Forlini alerting the press rather than the police is telling.
If a clerk thinks that a non-citizen voted, it is incumbent upon them to send that information to law enforcement for proper investigation and then ultimately prosecution, not to try to gain political points.
The newest SOS candidate, Garland Gilchrist, didn't weigh in specifically on the legitimacy of Forlini's claims, saying this.
People who are not eligible to vote should not vote. Doing so is illegal, and I would hold anyone who attempts to do that accountable and responsible as Secretary of State of Michigan. That's not acceptable. We shouldn't tolerate it even once. So that'll be my job to make sure it doesn't happen. And if it slips through the cracks, we'll take care of that and make sure those people get prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
The rest of the field for that race, by the way, includes Tim Smith, Monica Yatuma, and Amanda Love on the Republican side. The rest of the Democratic field includes Adam Hollier and Susanna Shkreli. Let's get our insider's take on this race and a few others right now on Flashpoint. And let's say good morning to our insiders. Here they are. Former Royal Oak Mayor Dennis Cowan is with us. Deputy editorial page editor at the Detroit News is Caitlin Buss. Her counterpart at the Detroit Free Press, editorial page editor Nancy Kaffer. And Portia Roberson is the vice chair of the state Democratic Party. All right, Portia, let me start with you since we just watched that piece. Did the lieutenant governor get a little nudge from the Democrats here to hop into the Secretary of State's race? What happened here?
Well, listen, I think that the lieutenant governor made his own decision. I don't think that the nudge was that strong. I think that people thought that he would be great as Secretary of State. And I think that, you know, any candidate has to look at how they're raising money and what the numbers look like and make decisions based upon that. And that's what he's going to do. And that's what he did, rather. You know, the convention itself is going to be an interesting experience. If you've ever been to a Democratic or Republican convention, they are a fiery place to be. So I don't think that there's any guarantees that he's going to get the nomination. There's still other candidates in this race.
That was my next thought.
Right.
I mean, you don't just jump out of a race without maybe hey, we'll make sure that you get the nomination. Caitlin?
No, I agree. I mean, I don't think it's set. I don't think there's any way for it to be set. But I think it was smart of him to see this opening in this race. I think, you know, he still has to make it through that primary. I think his opponents have some real issues that they have to work through. So I think it was a smart move on his part. It raises some questions about the Democratic Party. You know, is there room for these people at the top of the ticket? But I think it was a good move. And honestly, there's some people in the Republican Party that should make similar shuffles.
Meaning, well, I know some of the Democratic Secretary of State candidates certainly weren't expecting that and were disappointed. I'm guessing because they think, well, it feels like he's jumping to the top of the list there.
Well, sure. I mean, some of these folks have been running for months and months and trying to build their support among likely delegates at the convention. But, you know, as Portia said, there's numbers and fundraising and realities, and obviously the lieutenant governor is going to enter this with a huge advantage. I think people may forget that he started his foray into electoral politics with a run for Detroit City Clerk, which he lost. Which doesn't sound that impressive until you realize that he came within a percentage point of beating City Clerk Janice Winfrey, who normally wins by like 40-point margins. Yeah. So he's very versed in this area. It's a passion of his and a longtime interest. When
I asked the governor about this, Dennis, I found she got a little touchy when I just said, asking, did you counsel the lieutenant governor? And she said, you can ask him yourself. He's right behind me. So I think maybe, and then when I talked to the lieutenant governor about it, he didn't want to assess the current Secretary of State's job assessment, give her a job assessment, but it just felt like there was some behind-the-scenes things happening with this.
Well, it's unfortunate because Lieutenant Governor has served this governor faithfully for 7 years, almost 8, and he's getting the cold shoulder. She didn't endorse him for governor. She hasn't endorsed him for Secretary of State. And there's only about 30 days left in the credentialing process, voting process for the Democrats. So the window is closing. And if anybody guaranteed him the nomination, and I agree, Portia, Republican and Democrat conventions can be crazy, but I look back 8 years ago, Pat Miles, African-American candidate for Attorney General, was the establishment and UAW choice. Dana Nessel, to her credit, got the Bernie Bros, and with the process the Democrats have, ran the table, and she got the nomination. So there are no guarantees when you get to a convention.
If somebody expand on that, so the people at home know, in case somebody, you can't just say, we'll make sure you get this, because the people who don't know, Secretary of State is not going to a regular primary with voters. This is selected by the parties.
Yeah, it's, you know, you go to convention and there are delegates that are there that have to be members of the Michigan Democratic Party 30 days out before the actual convention, and they actually cast their vote for who they want. And so, you know, it is about who gets their delegates in the room, who makes sure that people are there, but you can't guarantee somebody that they're going to get a nomination. And I think one of the instances with Pat Miles, you know, I think that there was a thought that he could be guaranteed this, right? And didn't really keep in mind that somebody like Dana Nessel was going to work the tables and work the phones and get people into the convention, and that's what happened. And so you can't guarantee it. I mean, who knows what will happen? I do think, as Nancy has said, that the lieutenant governor has this kind of name recognition that is going to elevate him to the top immediately. And I'm sure there are people who said, we will endorse you, we will get behind your candidacy if you move to Secretary of State. And so with that knowledge, he made the move.
And as we saw this week, this past week, he was endorsed by the MEA, which has been, that's a very powerful organization. That's someone you'd want lining up behind you. They have the ability to get people to the convention and put that support behind them. But as everyone has said, it really is. You could say to a candidate, we'll do everything we can, but if you're making absolute guarantees, anyone who's been to a convention knows that that is just not possible.
Interesting.
There's no more smoke-filled rooms. They're not allowed. And on the Republican side, you got a competitive race with Forlini, Yatuma, and Love, who used to work for Secretary of State Land. So we'll probably have some of our own drama, but I think we got a good stable of candidates to compete in November.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting as well. Yeah. All right, let's take a quick time out. I want to talk about some polling numbers and the governor's race right after this. Stay with us on Flashpoint. Okay, back with our insiders here. All right, new polling out last week. Which stat, I'm going to ask the table, which stat are you most impressed by that was revealed in these polling numbers? Number one, that Mike Duggan has the highest name ID now of all candidates in outstate Michigan, or that John James continues to lead in all scenarios despite not campaigning at all yet. Caitlin?
I think it's impressive what Duggan's been able to do to move up. I think I'm not usually one to say like independents have their moment, but I think in Michigan with what's been going on, he may have a moment here, and it's kind of a state local thing. The most impressive result that I saw was actually I think how Mike Rogers is doing. And I think it's interesting that he's been able to establish himself as an independent candidate somewhat. Independents are increasingly drawn to him. So I thought that was interesting. It's a huge race here. Obviously, the Senate race will be really big.
For sure.
So that was the thing that stood out to me, kind of.
Nancy?
Yeah, it's really impressive that Duggan has been able to boost that number up. Now, approval is a different thing because there are a lot of places outstate where they still aren't super big fans of Detroit. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even in our metro area. But so this is still a lift for him. Now, the most likely outcome, with all due respect to the mayor, who is a scrappy campaigner and a hard worker, has been that he's going to scoop a lot of Democratic votes and not that many Republican votes. So it's not totally surprising that the candidate from the party that doesn't have this divisive kind of like Duggan was a Democrat for 40 years, not just a Democrat, a pretty prominent Democrat. Now he's an independent. Now he's running this way, and Jocelyn Benson is running as a Democrat, and then John James is just kind of a Republican over there. So that's not that surprising.
Our pollster does keep saying that he's polling equally, but it's polling.
James shows how far name ID goes, I think. I mean, that's really, and the money that's been behind him, and those two things are really hard to overcome.
Dennis?
Okay, the most stunning thing to me was 4 years ago, the Democrats got 56% for the governor's race. Jocelyn Benson's at about 34% in your poll. That's not a bleed, that's a hemorrhage. And that is a major issue for the Democrats.
But it's a three-way race now, too.
Yes, and if it remains a three-way race, right now the Republicans, you got James and Cox are kind of in the lead, both in polling and money, and both have run statewide twice. Cox has won twice, so we got two very formidable candidates. Nobody's talking about them yet. They haven't spent a dime. So I think that when things start to even out, I think you'll see Republicans have a very low threshold to get to like the 39–40% mark, which could be a possibility for our next governor. Yeah. They don't have that far to go. They just got to get the base back.
50% is, and I want to ask about the other Republican candidates. Sue, Portia, what stood out to you?
I think John James stood out to me the most because he hasn't campaigned at all. And because, I really think Mike Cox is going to show us, I think he's going to show up in a way that we have not seen yet. From what I understand, he's still, going after that Trump endorsement, and if he gets it, I think that's going to add to sort of the attraction from Republicans. I think that it'll be a very different race if it's Mike Cox and Jocelyn Benson and Mike Duggan than it will be if it's John James and Jocelyn Benson and Mike Duggan. I think there are a lot more Republicans that may shift over if it's that second three with John James. But it'll be interesting to see. I think we're waiting to see what John James does, if he's going to campaign at all, or is this going to be how he carries through the campaign?
It's not going to be anytime soon, from what I gather from the campaign. Let me ask about the Republicans, and I guess Chris Swanson as well. What do you think Tom Leonard, Mike Cox, and Eric Nesbitt have to do right now, seeing the polling that shows them behind? Dennis, start with you.
Well, what they are doing, I mean, they're out there raising money. Donors are very important right now, trying to, get your donor base behind you so you have the money to run a credible campaign. And also, they're going around the state right now, at least most of them, and they are going to, the Lincoln Day dinners and all those kind of events, going up to, different halls up in northern Michigan and Grayling, and meeting voters and meeting leaders in the Republican Party. And so they're out doing what needs to be done. Look, I don't think anybody is going to get out of the Republican race. Everybody remembers Rick Snyder came out of nowhere. And so everybody hopes they can catch that lightning in a bottle. Yeah. I think the Republicans would be well served if they concentrate on the education issue, because our scores are abysmal, and we need to turn that around.
I was kind of going to lead into that with you, Caitlin. Just what you probably don't think anybody's going to jump out of the race like we saw with Lieutenant Governor, but what are those, I don't want to call them second-tier candidates, but the guys who aren't polling as high, what should they be doing right now?
I think, like he said, I think they're doing a good job. The grassroots base of the Republican Party is so fiery and so capable of toppling whatever is, supposed to happen or not. But so they're doing the right thing. I think their messaging needs to get stronger. I think the complication with Trump is going to get more complicated for them, and not necessarily with the MAGA base, but that is fracturing and it's crumbling. So how they all dance around that Trump question as Trump continues to put things out, I think will be really defining. The Trump endorsement will be really defining if it comes, and if it doesn't, it's going to be scrappy. Matt
Hall also dancing around endorsing anybody just as of yet. For Chris Swanson and probably Mike Duggan a little bit, not great news that the lieutenant governor got out of the race, because that makes it a little easier for Jocelyn Benson to focus on both of them, correct?
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sheriff Swanson has certainly done a lot of work to try to get his message out, but she's pulling so far ahead and is so far ahead in money. It's just it's hard to see a path for him. And I mean, I imagine this was part of whatever the calculus was. And so instead of having to go through a punishing, expensive primary fight with the lieutenant governor, Benson now seems really like on track to cruise through the primary, and again can focus, like I said, on Mike Duggan and the eventual Republican nominee.
While we're talking about Governor, Portia, I'll start with you. I talked to Governor Whitmer last week at the auto show, and I asked her about Minneapolis, and she said they really avoided the situation in Michigan simply by keeping their head down, staying out of the spotlight. And she'd gone to the White House and almost made nice. But suddenly, a couple of criticisms, very pointed, one on tariffs, and then again in Switzerland on a panel, really ripping everything he said about Greenland. Do you see that maybe it's a new year, the final year? It's all right, now it's a new governor.
Yeah, well, I think it's a couple things. I think one, she realizes that in her final year, she can speak about these things in a way that she's not trying to get reelected. And if she is interested in a higher office, and rumor has it both ways, people are looking, specifically Democrats are looking at people who are talking back about what is happening in the Trump administration. You can't sort of make nice as things continue to grow and happen in terms of what's happening in Minneapolis, in terms of what's happening with tariffs. And she runs the state, which is most affected by these tariffs in many ways for the auto companies. I said to somebody the other day, as much as you may envy the job of Mary Barra and Jim Farley, not right now you don't, because your life is always so chaotic because you don't know what's going to happen from day to day. And I think the governor recognizes that she's going to have to speak about those issues if there's any desire to be named to a higher ticket.
What was your take, Dennis, on the governor just suddenly back to criticizing the president?
Well, it's a popular thing to do for Democrats, so certainly she's going to do it. Look, she's in her last year. Most recently, through Director Hertel, she's been trying to privatize the mental health system. That's stalled in the courts now. A lot of people think that's a misguided effort. The second thing is the feds pulled the plug on the subsidies for EV, which was a signature issue of hers. So the question is, it's kind of late in the game to try and say what my legacy is. I have very low expectations that much is going to happen. She doesn't have particularly good relations with the legislature right now, so I think we're going to see more trips to Switzerland and be on panels.
Well, let me ask Caitlin and Nancy, in regard to the governor. Last year, we kind of just touched on it. What should she be focusing on, and what do you actually think she can get done in this last year?
That's a great question, because as Dennis said, she does not have a great relationship with the legislature. Matt Hall has proven very willing to tank her signature initiatives or her goals. I think she really wants some legacy job creation stuff. AI data centers, by all accounts, do not seem to be the way to get there. I mean, the point is they're about automation, and Jeff Bezos says that in 20 years they're all going to be on the moon. I mean, this is like,
centers.
I mean, he said this, and he's going to do that. So he's got rockets. So I mean, I think that's probably where her
30 seconds.
I think Whitmer is a great retail politician. She is great at this. She's leaving office with pretty high approval rating given what she's done. So I think she knows this is the political moment to do that. When it was more politically convenient to be kind of on Trump's side last year, she kept quiet. I think that's really what's going on in her last year. I think she's noticed that education is a huge problem. That's why she said literacy is going to be her focus here. But that has been a problem her entire time in office. So to leave on that legacy, I don't think it's going to work.
Well, if we sit here in January, we know the budget process is right around the corner. We'll see exactly how it goes. My thanks to the insiders this morning. Thanks so much. We're right back to dive into the mailbag. Stay with us. All right, let's hit the mailbag before we duck out of here. Got plenty of feedback from our discussion on the Venezuela developments 3 Sundays ago from Martin. They say they want to stop the drugs from coming to the United States. While they were down there, why were no drug lords captured and why were no drug factories bombed? Again, that's from Martin C. Matt sent me this. Your comment about the U.S. taking the oil overlooked the fact the Venezuelan government stole the assets of American oil companies. That is true, Matt, and that's also why some of those companies like Exxon are now balking at going back in. From John K., my first thought on the Venezuela situation was the Pottery Barn rule. You break it, you bought it. How quickly we forget. Dan shot me a message on Facebook, too one-sided, and you have Rep. Dingell on, but the Trump administration said they couldn't tell them because they would have blown the story before the attack. Going back to the too one-sided part of this, I advised Dan in my response, if you do think that, send your message to any or all of the Republican lawmakers who declined to be part of the show that day. This one, though, is my favorite. Does your host, Colthorpe, not know that Hong Kong is part of China? For the love of all things holy, please don't ever try tackling Russia collusion. Well, when I replied to John, I did not give him the satisfaction of knowing, yes, I did confuse Hong Kong with Taiwan. But for the love of Pete, I did mention how Hong Kong stands out in China with its own customs, legal system, and economy, which is why I likely confused them in the moment. But still, thanks for the understanding email, John. You can send me an email as well. Send me your most thorough criticisms to flashpoint@clickondetroit.com. That's going to do it this week for us. Meet the Press coming up next. Stay warm out there. I'm Jason Colthorpe. We'll see you later.